The orneriest, slipperiest, deadliest gunslinger to ever ride out of the city of New York was Billy the Kid. That's right, New York. Folks who write him up as a born and bred son of the desert tend to forget that he came into the world as William Henry Bonney in 1859. In a tenement somewhere on the east side, the eldest of two boys whose father was dead before either of them was old enough to remember him. His ma, Kathleen, was Irish, fair-haired, and tough as a roofing nail. She took her boys west looking for a better life. Married a no-good fellow named Antrim somewhere along the way, and ended up running a boarding house in Silver City, New Mexico. The boarding house did fine. Antrim did not. Billy as a young boy was by all accounts a sweet kid. Helped old ladies cross the street, carried parcels for the priest, could not pass a stray dog without trying to feed it. Folks who knew him then said he was the politest little fellow in town. The trouble was he had a temper, and once it lit, you weren't going to put it out with a prayer. He was 12 when it went off the first time. A loafer outside Joe Dryer's saloon said something low about his mother. Billy hit him in the mouth. A big citizen named Ed Bolton came out of the saloon and flattened the loafer with one punch. And that should have been the end of it. 3 weeks later, the same loafer crept up behind Moulton in a bar fight with a chair raised over his head. Billy slid under the chair with a pocket knife in his hand and came out the other side with the knife wet. The loafer dropped. Billy ran into the desert that same night and never saw his mother again. She died of tuberculosis the next September. Billy was already in Arizona by then, riding double on a sore-backed pony with a fellow whose real name was such a secret that Billy just called him Alias. The two of them turned up at Fort Bowie hungry and busted. Billy was 14. He needed a horse. He fell in with 3 Apaches who had 12 fine ponies and a stack of furs, and no interest in parting with any of them. Friends, said Billy, who spoke good Spanish. Could we work out a trade? No, said the Apaches. How about for a pony? No. Half a pony? No. How that ended, Billy summed up himself years later at a campfire. It was a groundhog case, he said. No alternative. There was 3 good Indians lying around these careless like, and we skipped. He was not yet 16 years old. Down in Sonora, he killed a card cheat named Don Jose Martinez, who'd been refusing to pay him his winnings for weeks. The two of them drew on each other across the monte table one night. Both pistols went off at once. Jose fell back dead with a bullet through the eye, and Billy slapped his hand to his ear like he'd been bit by a horsefly. Felt like somebody yanked out 3 or 4 hairs, he said. And he was on a horse, and out of Sonora, and never coming back. Down in Chihuahua, a Monte dealer cheated him out of a sack of gold doubloons. A dealer was found a few days later in unfortunate circumstances. Billy paid his bills for months afterward in Spanish gold, out of a fine embroidered buckskin sack that he handed across the bar with a polite smile. By 1877, he was back in New Mexico, 18 years old, riding with a pack of cowboys near Mesilla. One of them, Jim Daniels, took one look at the smooth-faced young rider with the 2 front teeth and said, "Boys, this here is the kid." It stuck. The kid hired on with an Englishman named John Tunstall. Tunstall had money. Tunstall had a store, and a bank, and a ranch on the Rio Feliz, and ideas about civilizing Lincoln Country, which up to that point hadn't been showing much interest in being civilized. He was partnered with a lawyer named McSween, and bankrolled by the cattle king, John Chisholm, and the 3 of them were squaring off against the firm of Murphy and Dolan, who had owned Lincoln County for so long they forgot anyone else lived there. The papers later called what happened the Lincoln County War. Folks who were there called it a Tuesday. Tunstall was good to Billy. Paid on time, shook his hand, treated him like a man. "Mr. Tunstall," said Billy one afternoon. "Yes, Billy? I appreciate this. Don't mention it." A few months later, in February of 1878, a posse loyal to Murphy and Dolan caught Tunstall alone on the road and shot him out of the saddle. A man named Tom Hill rode up to where Tunstall lay gasping in the dirt, put a rifle to the back of his head, and pulled the trigger. By that evening, Billy had heard. He didn't say much. He pulled his hat down over his blue eyes and went looking. He found Morton and Baker, 2 of Tunstall's killers, within a month. A posse was supposed to bring them in alive for a trial. Somewhere on the Pecos near the Blackwater Holes, somebody in the posse got nervous. Shots went off. The prisoners broke and ran. Billy spurred to the front of the pack and fired twice. 2 saddles emptied. He climbed down off his horse and turned Morton over with his boot and looked at him a long time without saying anything to anyone. Morton had been a friend of his once, before he turned into something else. He killed Sheriff William Brady next, in the main street of Lincoln, on April Fool's Day of 1878. Brady was walking to the courthouse with two deputies. Behind an adobe wall of Tunstall's store, Billy and 5 friends had cut notches in the top of the wall to rest their rifles. They opened up. Brady fell dead in the street. Billy hopped the wall to grab Brady's rifle, and a deputy across the way named Matthew shot the rifle clean out of his hand and put a furrow across his ribs for the trouble. Brady was a decent man, Billy told a friend later. I'll allow that. Then why'd you do him? Wrong side. That July, 40 men under a new sheriff besieged McSwain House in Lincoln, with Billy and a dozen of his friends inside. The siege lasted 3 days. On the 3rd day, they set the house on fire. 11 rooms. Adobe burns slow as winter molasses, but it burns. Mrs. McSwain had already left. McSwain himself sat down in the smoke and said he was tired. Billy pulled his hat tight and stood up in the kitchen doorway. Listen, he said. When the fire breaks through, we go. Out the door, across the river, into the brush. We'll have an even chance in the dark. One of the Mexicans hollered surrender out the window. Billy clubbed him across the head with a pistol butt, and the man dropped like a sack of meal. Then they went. The kid was first out the door. He shot a cattleman named Beckwith, dead in the yard, jumped over the body and fought his way through 20 armed men with a revolver in each hand, firing as he went, all the way down to the brush along the Rio Bonito. He vanished into the dark. McSwain came out a step behind him and dropped in the yard with 9 bullets in him, refusing to run. For the next 2.5 years, Billy was the most famous outlaw in the Southwest. He rustled cattle from John Chisholm, who had refused to pay the wages he claimed he was owed for fighting Chisholm's war. He danced at fandangos in Fort Sumner. He had girls, plural. He wrote polite letters to the governor of the territory, asking for a pardon, and politely threatening consequences if he didn't get one. He did not get one. There was a man named Joe Grant, who came up from Texas in the winter of 1880, boasting he was going to kill the kid. Said it loud, in saloons, where Billy was sure to hear. Billy walked over to him at the bar one night, and admired Grant's fine ivory-handled revolver. Asked could he see it. Grant handed it over. Billy turned the cylinder so an empty chamber lined up next. They handed it back with a smile. Later that night, Grant came up behind Billy and tried to shoot him in the back. The gun snapped on empty. Billy turned around and put 3 balls into Joe Grant's head before Joe Grant knew what was happening. He was a brave man, Billy said afterward, but he was a fool. In November of 1880, the people of Lincoln County elected a new sheriff named Pat Garrett. Garrett was 6'4", lean as a rail, and quiet. He had known Billy back in Fort Sumner before any of this. They sat at the same card tables. They drank from the same bottles. They understood each other in a way 2 men understand each other when one of them is going to have to kill the other. And both of them know it. Garrett tracked Billy down through the snow that December. He pinned him at a rock house at Stinking Springs on the morning of the 23rd. He shot Bourdet, dead in the doorway, by accident, thinking it was Billy. Then he sat down outside and waited. Billy was many things, but he was not dumb. Pat, he called from inside. All right, we're coming out. They came out. They tried him at Mesilla. They sentenced him to hang in Lincoln on the 13th of May, 1881. They locked him up on the 2nd floor of the old Murphy and Dolan store, which had been turned into a courthouse, and he put 2 guards on him, a deputy named Bell, who liked him, a deputy marshal named Bob Ollinger, who did not. Ollinger loaded a double-barrel shotgun in front of the kid one morning, putting 18 buckshot in each barrel. Kid, said Ollinger, the man who gets one of these is sure gonna feel it. Bob, said the kid, I imagine he will. On the evening of April 28th, 1881, Ollinger took the other prisoners across the street to supper. Bell stayed upstairs. The kid asked to use the privy in the back corral. On the walk back up the stairs, Billy got a few steps ahead. He slipped his small Irish hands clean off the cuffs. He ducked in the armory closet, came out with a pistol, and turned at the top of the stairs just as Bell looked up. Hello, Bell. Bell ran. Billy shot him. Bell stumbled into the corral and dropped before reaching the gate. Billy slipped the empty handcuffs off his wrists and threw them down at the body. Here, he said, take these 2. Then he walked into Garrett's office, calm as a man going to fetch his hat, and pulled Ollinger's own double-barrel shotgun off the wall. He carried it to the upstairs window. Ollinger was already running across the street from supper. The little German handyman in the yard saw him coming. Bob? Called the German. The kids killed Bell. A voice came down from the upstairs window, cheerful. Hello, old boy. Ollinger looked up. Yes, said Ollinger. And he's killed me too. Billy fired once. 18 buckshot. Ollinger dropped. Billy walked out onto the balcony and fired the second barrel into the body where it lay. Then he broke the shotgun across the railing and drew the pieces down at Ollinger. "You won't follow me with that gun no more." He filed his leg shackles off at the front window, with a rasp the handyman fetched for him. Took him an hour. He danced on the balcony while he filed. He hollered greetings down to the folks he recognized in the street. The whole town of Lincoln watched, and not one person tried to stop him. He saddled a borrowed horse, mounted up with one shackle still swinging from his ankle, tipped his hat, and rode out at a walk. He had less than 3 months left. Pat Garrett cut up to him in the dark in the back bedroom of an old friend's house in Fort Sumner on the night of July 14th, 1881. Garrett was sitting on the edge of the bed in the dark, asking quiet questions, when a barefoot young man stepped through the doorway, with a butcher knife in one hand and revolver in the other. "Que es?" said the young man. Garrett knew the voice. He fired twice in the dark. One bullet was enough. Billy fell on the floor in his stocking feet, and never spoke again. He was 21 years, 7 months, and 21 days old. Folks said for a long time afterward that Pat Garrett shot him in the dark by surprise, and that wasn't square. Garrett wrote a book the next year to set the record straight. The book sold poorly. The legend did fine without it.